if you were to describe healthy nutrition or a healthy diet, I guess, in a nutshell to somebody, what would you say?
I would describe it in the ABCs of nutrition. Welcome to the Complete Nutrition Podcast.
The podcast where we break free from the dieting cycle and explore sustainable, realistic ways to improve your health.
I'm Kylie, a registered dietitian with over 10 years of experience.
And I'm Spencer, and I've been eating food my entire life. And I happen to be a nurse.
Each week, we dive into the science, psychology, and strategies behind mindful eating and sustainable change.
Whether you're here to transform your relationship with food, learn how to make lasting lifestyle changes, or are simply curious about what true health looks like, you're in the right place.
We'd invite you to subscribe and tag along if you'd like to stop dieting and start living.
This episode is brought to you by the vitamin C.
So let me tell you about vitamin C. Hundreds of years ago, when sailors went out to sea, it was pretty well known that if you were out on the boat or the ship long enough, you would eventually develop scurvy. And scurvy was characterized by, they had bleeding gums, it was really easy to bruise. Oftentimes there were sores on people's legs, and eventually it would lead to death.
Oof. Wouldn't they take like way more sailors than they needed just because they knew that a bunch of them were going to die? So they'd like overstaff.
Yeah.
And then they would all die.
Because it was all well known that scurvy would eventually get to everyone. And it wasn't until the 1700s that the Royal Navy surgeon from Great Britain, his name was James Lind, he did one of the first controlled experiment trials on a ship that he was on with his crew. And he divided his crew into two groups. One group of sailors received their regular rations, but they also received cider, vinegar, and also seawater to drink. And the other group, he gave the regular rations, but these rations also included 2 oranges and 1 lemon per day. And the results of this experiment showed that the citrus prevented the disease of scurvy.
But he didn't really know why, right? Like he thought that it was the acid. So they like gave him like a bunch of other stuff that didn't have vitamin C. But they thought it was the acidity. They didn't know vitamin C existed.
Right. So they knew it was something from the actual citrus fruit, but they didn't know or didn't have the means to know that it was actual vitamin C, which that wasn't until the early 1900s, when vitamin C was actually isolated and identified as a vitamin and as an essential nutrient. And now we know that vitamin C is a very important part of a healthy diet. And specifically, it helps with the synthesis of collagen, and collagen is in all of our muscles, and it helps with skin and muscle growth. And it also is an important antioxidant that can help prevent a variety of chronic diseases.
Very nice. Now you know, vitamin C.
Do you know where vitamin C is or what foods provide vitamin C?
Citrus fruits.
Besides that, lots of fruits and vegetables will contain vitamin C, but especially citrus fruits have a lot of vitamin C.
Are they the things that have the most vitamin C?
Yes.
Oh, that was another fun fact. When we were researching this, we found out that the indigenous people to the Arctic regions, they couldn't grow, tropical citrus fruits, but seals. Was it seals?
No, it was blue whale skin.
Blue whale skin. So blue whales, I guess, make their own vitamin C, and we don't. So they would eat, blue whale skin. I think it was also seal blubber, and that had vitamin C in it, and that's how they were able to, not die of scurvy all the time. So anyway, kind of interesting.
All right, Spencer, I want to know if I were to ask you, how would you define health, or what is health to you? What would you say? How would you describe health?
Okay. So, that's obviously like a really broad question. So if somebody just came up to me on the street and was like, hey, what is health to you? I would say the first thing that comes to mind is psychological health, because I feel like if I can't function mentally, I'm not going to be able to take care of myself physically very well. At least that seems to be the experience a lot of people have. So I feel like I need to be able to take care of myself mentally and be in a good place so that I can take care of myself. And then once you get past that, little detail, I suppose, or big detail, then I think that it's a lot easier to take care of yourself physically. And that's what I would say health is after that, is your physical health, of course. And again, that's also like hard to define because there's so many different levels of physical health. And some people would say that I'm not healthy, even though I feel like I'm pretty healthy. Like I I feel like I eat pretty well and I get out and do stuff and I say I'm like somewhat active at least, but like compared to an Olympic gymnast or something, I'm probably not very healthy. They probably have like a ridiculous eating regimen. I don't really know. I have no idea. But obviously they exercise a lot and they're super fit and they're definitely healthier than I am. But that doesn't make me unhealthy. Like I'm still happy, I suppose, and I feel good.
Do you feel like there's a range of health?
Yeah, that's an easier way to say it. There's a range of physical health. So yes.
Do you feel like we all need to be Olympic athletes in order to be healthy?
Certainly not. That's what I'm saying. Like I feel good where I am, and I don't want to be an Olympic athlete, but I feel healthy, and of course, like you said, there's a range of health. So if you feel like good and like you can, you feel good, I guess physically, then I'd say you're healthy. I don't know, right?
To comment on your comments, there's a quote that I heard that I really liked about health, that health is a state of action, not a state of being. I think a lot of times we feel like we have to achieve that Olympic athlete status in order to feel like we are healthy. But really, as long as you're working on healthy habits, I think you're healthy.
Okay.
And
that's like kind of that mental piece too, like if you're working on healthy habits, then you're improving your mental health, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of this bigger definition of health, right? Health is more so than just your mental health, but if you're working on all of these different pieces of your health isn't something really that we get to and we can say, okay, check, I'm here, I'm done, I'm healthy. But health is something that we all work on every single day. It's going to look different at different stages of our life, at different ages, and different locations.
That's very true.
And so I don't think that we can put a super narrow definition of what health looks like because it's different for everyone. And as long as you are working on different things, depending on whatever aspect of health it is, I think you can state that you are healthy. And just as healthy as an Olympic athlete.
All right. That's very nice, actually. That's very good. Okay, that was a lot better definition than my definition. Okay, Kylie, so we've kind of defined health, or I've tried to define health, I guess I should say. So if somebody were to ask you what health is, and I know you kind of already talked about it, what would you say?
Well, you've touched on pieces of it, but I would zoom out and say that health is so much more than, I feel like most people I work with, health is really, for them, oftentimes defined as what we eat and how active we are. And a lot of people, that health is defined in a way that we look, that we have to look or be or have a certain body size in order to be healthy. But if you were to zoom out and really look at what health is, I would definitely say nutrition is a part of being healthy. Our physical health, and even amongst the physical health, I think you could go in and talk about your cardiovascular health, your muscular health, your joint health, your mobility, your flexibility. There would also be, I would even say, oral health. How is your oral hygiene? How are your teeth? How are cavities? Hygiene in general. How are you taking care of yourself? Mental health, our emotional health, and even financial health. Are your finances stable? Are you investing in retirement? Spiritual health, I think that can be a really important piece to a lot of people's health spectrum. Our sexual health, and even social health. I think social health and our social networking is sometimes something that maybe isn't often included, but if we're like in an isolating job, or if we're in a new neighborhood, our social health can definitely impact other aspects. And all of these different facets of health are interconnected and impact, I would say, each and every aspect of our health. If we aren't financially well, it's going to impact our nutrition or potentially even our mental health. If we're not socially well, I mean, think how often we have these social get-togethers around food, or if, oftentimes we follow what our surroundings or what our neighbors or what our friends are doing. So even, there's been studies that look at social health and look at that there are some neighborhoods, or some social settings that are maybe a little bit more inducive for like recreational drug use or different things that can be unhealthy, or even on the flip side of healthier. So all of these different aspects, when we look at health, they all play a role, and being healthy is making sure that we are well and that we have good well-being in all of these different aspects. It's definitely not just what we're eating and how we're exercising.
What complex beings we are. That is a lot
Truly
to keep track of.
Truly.
And it sounds a little overwhelming, but we're not going to talk about all those right now. Today, on this episode, we're talking about some basic stuff. And that's the next question. So you're talking about the health that a lot of people come and ask you about, which is like the diet and exercise. If you were to describe healthy nutrition or a healthy diet, I guess, in a nutshell to somebody, what would you say?
I would describe it in the ABCs of nutrition. A being adequate, B being balanced, and C being consistent.
Okay.
So adequate, let me talk about adequate.
Okay.
Adequate is eating enough. I think too often I work with people that feel like in order to be healthy, they need to be maybe in a smaller body, or need to be eating less, or even feeling hungry. And I often find that people will try and undereat, which can cause all sorts of other things and can drive overconsumption. But it is so important that we are getting enough to fuel ourselves, to help keep our metabolism healthy, to help keep our hunger and fullness cues in check, and making sure that we are eating enough and fueling enough throughout the day.
Okay. So, you kind of answered it already, and this is kind of a dumb question, but how do you know if you're eating enough? Like, I know there's people that, will eat too much or eat too little. Like, how do you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, you have nieces and nephews, and no one's following them around with MyFitnessPal, tracking every single thing that they're eating and making sure they're getting enough. And if any of you, of our listeners who have had children, oftentimes they can eat like birds and eat really small amounts, and other times they'll eat enough. And sometimes as new parents, people worry that their kids aren't eating enough. But we are all born with internal cues. We've got hunger hormones and fullness hormones. So hormones that help us to feel these physical sensations that help us to drive our eating patterns. And what can happen is, it's called external eating, is the older that we get, we start to do more external eating, where we eat because it's time to eat. We eat because we paid $40 for this plate, so we're going to eat the whole thing. We eat because it's a special holiday food that we only get once a year, so we're going to eat lots of it. And we start eating based off of these external cues as opposed to listening to these internal cues. And it can, if we stop listening to them, they can start to get subdued, or
Our internal cues.
Our internal cues, yeah. And it's harder for us to feel those sensations. And so part of eating adequate would be trying to focus internally and being a little bit more mindful and trying to listen to those hunger and those fullness cues to get your body back into a rhythm. And granted, I know life isn't perfect, and I mean, we all have to work, and most of us have kids and families and things, but for the most part, trying to follow those hunger and fullness cues and listening to your body and trusting your body, it will not do you wrong.
Very good. Very good. So follow-up question. So if you've lost your internal cues, like, how do you get them back? Like, if you've ignored them for too long.
Yeah, and I definitely see that. I would say the most common eating pattern that I see with people who I work with is they skip breakfast and they either have a really small lunch, or oftentimes they'll skip lunch and then dinner will be the biggest meal.
Yeah.
Especially for most Americans, dinner is our biggest meal. And when your body is used to that, you definitely stop having these regular hunger fullness cues, and there needs to be a bit of healing for those hunger cues to come back. So that's where I would say the C comes into play, of consistency. Our body needs some type of nutrition, usually around every 3 or 4 hours. So, I mean, if I were to break it down for most people, again, this isn't a blanket statement, but for most people, we need about 3 meals and 2 or 3 snacks. And that would be eating around every 3 or 4 hours.
Okay. So if you basically would just have to retrain your internal cues with consistency.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I have worked with people, it's really interesting, who have lost those cues, and when they come back, it can be almost fearful. It can be a really new experience.
Oh.
People also talk about the annoyance of feeling hungry again.
Whoa, interesting.
And yeah, it is interesting, but it definitely can be something with consistency that you can heal and get back to feeling those, being in tune and your body responding and sensing those hormones.
Our bodies and brains are so weird. That's cool. Okay, so you talked about adequate, and then the next thing was B, balanced.
Balanced, yeah. So adequate and balanced. And with balanced eating, if you go back to grade school when we were taught about the food pyramid. And the food pyramid has since then gone through a lot of changes, and now it's the My Plate. Have you seen the My Plate before?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, they changed that, I want to say like 2011, 2012, in the early teens. And My Plate, when we talk about balance, we talk about all the different food groups. So we've got fruits, we've got vegetables, dairy, proteins, fats, and grains. And we need a balance of all of those different types of food groups because they're all giving us different nutrients. And so when I say balanced, ideally in a meal, I would say shoot for around 3 of those different food groups, and for snacks to shoot for 2 of those different food groups. And if we're getting those different food groups, we're getting enough variety and enough balance that it can give us all the nutrients that we need. But also, even beyond that, in terms of digestion and energy usage, if we're getting more of that balance, it actually helps us to digest better, and it actually helps us to sustain the energy of the food that we're eating.
Wait, sorry, sustains the energy of the food that we're eating?
Yeah, so if you were to just eat, let's say you were to just eat a piece of toast, so just a grain group, your body would digest that and store it pretty quickly. Okay. But if we were to add in, maybe you were to put some peanut butter on that toast, and maybe you were to eat...
And what food group is that? Sorry.
Peanut butter would be in your proteins. Okay. There's some overlap. This is where it can get confusing. So peanut butter, I would say, counts as a protein. You could also count it as a fat. I think that's the beauty of nutrition, and that there is a lot of overlap, and so it's hard to go wrong as long as you're getting a variety. But okay. So let's say you had peanut butter toast and you threw in a fruit with that. The fruit's going to have some fiber, and all of those combination of nutrition, it sits in your intestines for longer, and then you have a steadier release of energy because you're digesting it slower.
Interesting.
So you feel full for longer, gives you more sustained energy, but then you're also packing it with different nutrients that are going to be doing a plethora of other things that are important in our body.
That's
so balance, cool. A variety of all sorts of food groups.
Okay, very nice. All right. That's cool. I didn't know that if you ate more things together, that it would release energy more slowly and just more efficiently, it sounds like. That's really cool. I did not know that. Okay, and then we kind of already touched on it, but the C was consistency, right?
Right. Yep. ABC is adequate, balanced, and consistent. So eating every 3 to 4 hours.
And you said with 2 to 3 snacks interspersed throughout.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct.
I definitely don't do that very well. So something I can learn. And I live with a dietitian, so I think we all have things to learn. Okay. So next question. If you were to give a brief discussion of like the basics of nutrition, and Nutrition 101, I guess, what do you want people to understand?
I would probably start with, truly, this is probably, if you were to snag a college textbook of Nutrition 101, this would probably be in chapter 1, where they talk about macronutrients, micronutrients, and the essential nutrients for a human life to live.
Okay.
And macronutrients, have you heard of those before? Or macros, counting macros?
I've heard of it, but I don't really know what they are. At least I don't remember. So.
Macros. So macronutrients are the nutrients that we need in larger amounts. So carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So macros has been a trendier maybe diet. I don't know if I'd call it a diet, but a way to track that people focus on the percentages of their macros, which we can get into more of the nitty-gritty in future podcasts. But I think the essentials for what is necessary is to know that if you were to take all of the different foods and to pull and break them down into all of the different nutrient groups, they would all be able to be broken down into carbohydrates, fats, or proteins.
And we need the macros.
We need those in larger amounts, so in grams. And then micronutrients, those are going to be vitamins and minerals. We need them in such small amounts, so milligrams, micrograms, and they are the vitamins and minerals, they call them cofactors in our metabolism. They drive different metabolic reactions and different metabolic processes. So like the vitamin C that we talked about earlier, it was a driving cofactor in making collagen. So when you take that away, our body is not able to create collagen. It stops that reaction, and then that can cause those deficiencies and can cause illness and disease and all sorts of things. And so all foods can be broken down into macronutrients, and then they all contain micronutrients. But there is one major, I guess, I don't know what you'd call it, food or nutrition group that should also be mentioned, which would be water. Which water doesn't really provide calories. It might have some micronutrients if it has like minerals in it or mineral water, but water in and of itself isn't really considered a nutrient, but water, something that we need a lot of. If you think about how long we can survive without water, it's not very long, because we are made mostly of water. So of all of those, I would definitely say that water is the most important, and making sure we're getting enough water.
So it could be called, let me make sure that I got this right. So macro you need the most of, and that's why it's called macro.
Correct.
And micros are like the things that you still need, but you don't need as much of. Mm-hmm. So water it's not a nutrient, I guess, but it would be a macronutrient. It would be
considered a macronutrient if you had to put it in one of those categories, for sure.
Okay. All right. So if we are eating macronutrients, we're also getting the micronutrients in it? Because it sounds kind of scary. Like, how long would it take for me to lose vitamin C or like not have enough micronutrients? Like,
that's a good question. And every micronutrient has a different deficiency rate or deficiency level. And so, I mean, that would be, each one would be unique, but as long as you're getting a variety, and on average within, you know, within your week, if you're getting a variety of these food groups, a variety of these foods, and especially living in a developed nation, it's super rare to have micronutrient deficiencies. I definitely see it for people who are maybe sick or have certain conditions that are causing them to be deficient in certain nutrients.
Like they can't absorb it or something?
Can absorb it, yeah. So like a lot of inflammatory bowel diseases, depending on what parts of your bowels are affected, it will impact their absorption. Or let's say if you have like a GI bleed, you might be deficient in iron. Or if you've got like, I don't know, thyroid issues, you might be concerned about your iodine. I mean, there's just different conditions that we are specific to the nutrients.
So if I were to go, if I like ate only frozen burritos every day and that was the only thing I ate, like, is like I would be fine, or like after a while I would become deficient. Like I would have to do something like that to become deficient. Like I'd have to be super extreme.
And to be honest, I would say frozen burritos like is pretty good in terms of balance, because you probably have some beans, you probably have some meats, you probably have some tortillas. So maybe frozen burrito isn't the best example, but let's say if you were to only eat fruits and vegetables,
that's it.
And nothing else, that you would probably develop like a protein deficiency, and that could cause a plethora of problems. Or if you were to only eat, let's say, I don't know, corn, then for sure you'd probably die or have issues of, I mean, all sorts of things. B12 would be an issue, protein would be another issue. So we definitely are needing variety. And if you were to eat one food group, which that being said, I mean, we know that there are vegans and vegetarians, right, that are, or even carnivore diets, right, that are cutting out specific food groups.
Yeah.
And you can definitely do those types of diets, but you do have to be careful of knowing what supplements to take in order to add in those micronutrients that you're taking out to not develop deficiencies and not develop any issues later on.
So basically you'd have to be on a pretty extreme diet to find any kind of lack of micro or macronutrients.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yep, in developing nations it is, I think, hard.
Yeah, that's a whole other story.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay, all right. That's actually very helpful. Okay. Well, we're at the end of our podcast. We're reaching the end of our time here. So the last thing I want to ask are just some key takeaways. Like, what are some of the things that you want the listeners to remember from everything that we've talked about today?
I would say that health is so much more than just nutrition and physical activity or what you look like. Sometimes we need to pause and focus on certain aspects of health that need extra attention. But from a nutrition standpoint, to put it very simply, that as long as we're eating enough, getting variety, and eating consistently, and there's obviously a lot more of the nitty-gritty that we plan on getting into in later episodes. But as long as you're focusing on those three things, you are being healthy and you are eating healthy, and you don't really need to sweat the small stuff. And I would just focus on what you can do and what you are able to do, and do the best that you can with those pieces. If you are listening, we imagine that you are probably on your own health journey. Thank you so much for letting us be a part of this journey. We want to invite you to consider these 3 questions as a weekly personal check-in.
The first question is that maintaining a positive mindset is crucial for success. So, what are your victories and your wins from the past week?
Second question, what are your intentions or focus or goals for this next week? Reminder that the simpler and more realistic, the better.
And the last question is, what are you going to do to accomplish this goal? Be specific, and we invite you to write this down somewhere. What specific things will you do to reach this goal of yours?
Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you are listening to, we would invite you to subscribe.
We'd also invite you to leave a review. If you do, you will be entered into our monthly drawing to win a box of meal deliveries. Take a screenshot of your review and send it to Complete Nutrition, complete with a K, completenutrition@gmail.com. You can also check us out online at www.complete-nutrition.com or on Instagram at complete_nutrition.